It is now 7:35, and I call to order this meeting of the RTM Finance and Budget Committee. If there's no objections, I'd like to move the one of our agenda items to vote on 23-14C, which is the Board of Education budget. Before we do the other ones, and then we can get back into what's going on, because that way Alan and John Cini can leave. I am now going to attempt to share my screen. We'll see if I'm successful on that. No, I don't want that one. Are we seeing, let's see. That's not what I want. Applications. I want to go to applications. Is anybody seeing that at all? This isn't good.
Not yet.
And it's up. Well, if we can't do it that way, I'll move media sound. I don't need that. Screens. See if we do it that way. Here we go. That's the one I want to share. Oh, and that has, yeah. Are you guys seeing the full screen or just the umbrellas and everything?
Umbrellas.
Make it bigger. There we go. Is that better?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay. So I'm going to first go to the year-over-year Board of Ed. I have these numbers for fiscal year 24. I just have to enter them. I got them earlier today from, I got them earlier from Rich Rudel. Here you're seeing, oh, this is the, I'm just going to go to this next screen, which has, if you look on the far right corner under the dollar sign on the yellows, it has the salaries, operations, fixed cost, equipment. The ECR are the revenues. You see what the changes are, and it comes to 3.47. Rich Rudel has worked out what is the core and what is the growth parts of the budget. I'm going to go to the next page, only because I do not have the underlying numbers there, but I think it's important that we recognize some of the things that we've done. And in fact, I have to add something over here. So for the core drivers, what made up the number that he had put there is the approved bargaining unit contracts, healthcare, which we know went up, employment enrollment issues, and then non-personnel contractual increases, i.e. cleaning, the garbage, software, increase in the Fitch leaf, increase in transportation, utility increases, anything that's done in special ed, any increases, including staffing, is core because that's a core business that they deliver. Technology equipment, this is one of the areas where I got to speak to Rich because he had it in the growth section. I believe it should be in the core section. There were personnel reductions, so I want to have that in the core side. Rich also didn't put down the elimination of budget control. I think that's an important thing to add when I'm delivering the budget, because it's the right decision. The Board of Ed have been discussing it for some time, but it also allows, at least for myself, to remind the RTM that the Board of Ed really made some tough decisions and really brought their budget pretty tight. I mean, this is a really tight budget, but there's a commitment from at least F&B and hopefully from the same RTM and also from the Board of Finance. They made that commitment that because they brought the budget so tight, should they need extra funds, come back to us in the February timeframe, and they're going to get those extra funds. So the elimination of budget control becomes an area where we can introduce that concept, because I think it's important that the RTM hears that now. Not that I'm anticipating that the Board of Ed is coming back, but rather, I want to put it in their minds now. Then it has the revenues on ECR and the other revenues that are up slightly. I just put in a number for the security enhancements just to make sure the number would be there. But on the growth drivers, we have security enhancements that were approved in fiscal year 23, Director of Mental Health approved in fiscal year 23, any new personnel, sports officials for additional games now under the lights. That's not a big amount, but I moved it up because it fits into the same box. Grant compression. If you remember, there were two individuals that have been working for 2 to 3 years in the district, but they were being paid for by a grant. The grant is no longer paying for them. So it's new because it wasn't in the prior year's budget. It also allows us to remind people here that there's significant other grants that are in the back of the in the appendix, and I'll mention the number of people that are being paid within that grant, and that the Board of Ed and the administration are fully aware. Should that grant stop, those bodies are not going away. So also then robotics, technology equipment, the Teen Talk programs, the change in substitutes and building substitute, new software, and Fitch expansion. And so I'll have those numbers filled in with Rich either tomorrow or Friday. And that will be what we have on the Board of Ed. So with that, and Jenny, I'm going to ask you to take control because I don't see what's going on anyplace. So I need a motion from somebody to move 23-14C, approving the Board of Ed budget for $114,448,824. Jenny, can you shout out who's moving it?
Who's moving? Let's see. I need cameras on and somebody to move it.
I'll move it.
Lynn?
Okay. And a second?
Let's see. I can't see. Who's
Beth,
in orange? Is
switch
it Bill
off
Smith?
on your
Bill Smith.
birthday. Okay,
Bill
Bill
Smith.
Smith. Right.
Yeah.
All right. Is there any further discussion on the Board of Ed budget? Duke was going to be here tonight, but he had a business meeting, and I told him to go to his business meeting because I didn't anticipate a lot of questions. But I did want a Board of Ed rep here. So just in case there were. Any questions or comments on the Board of Ed budget?
Nice job.
That's a good comment. Yeah, they worked real hard on this. This was really one of the better budget seasons I've ever seen. So, all right, are we ready to vote?
Yes, we are.
Okay. Can people turn on their screens? So all in favor, raise your hand or say aye.
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 Are there any?
Aye.
Are there any no votes? Hearing none, it passes unanimously. I'm gonna, so thank you, John and Alan, for showing up. If you want to be bored with the rest of this meeting, be my guest. Otherwise, you're free to go.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and members of the committee. I do appreciate your deliberations and discourse throughout the budget process, and always for your support for the educational budget. So thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Alan. All right. So let me go through a couple of things, and then we'll go to some of the other slides that I'm preparing. What I'm doing is showing you the slides that will be presented during the budget. Some of them will be, I'll send it out earlier. I just haven't had the opportunity to get things out yet. So, and I'll probably send them out Friday and everything to members of the RTM. They're all in print shape, so if you want to kill a tree, you can print them out. But I do suggest that having them is a little bit better than trying to read them on the screen at the stage in the auditorium. Okay, so we're on to then 23-14A, the capital appropriation. So there's a change, and Kate and I started to have a conversation today, and we'll finish it up with Jen and Wayne. But I think the order and how we've done things on the budget needs to change to accommodate how we are now raising taxes and for what items. The big change here is that there's the operation less revenues for the town and the Board of Ed. Capital is no longer included in the town budget total. And the reason is because we're going to raise taxes within the same mill rate, but once it gets paid, it's going to be moved directly into the into the reserve fund for capital non-recurring expenditures. So that's to keep the general fund from having these wide swings year after year because of the deposits for capital going in and not, and then moved around. So what I have on the screen now is the town capital and the Board of Ed capital. Again, I'll put in the fiscal year 22 adopted, but I do have total capital. For adopted 23, you can see what the difference is. There's significant reduction in Board of Ed capital, basically because we're redoing 3 schools. And so we have to do an appropriation for $4,667,767. And that's the total appropriation, authorizing the expenditure of that amount in the capital reserve. When we go to do the raising of taxes, you can see that the reserve fund already has 559,000 plus change of revenue, and last week we approved the 2,640,000 transfer from the general fund, because we're getting all this money back, into the reserve fund, so that we're only raising 1.7 million plus change in taxes, and you'll see that come up again later. By the way, in fiscal year 22, we didn't raise any money for the taxes on the capital side because all the capital was paid by either transfers or bonding or revenue. So you can see that we also closed out $1 million because that's the year that the fire engines change took place. So anyway, so can we have somebody move the appropriation to the reserve fund for capital non-recurring expenditures for $4,667,767? Jenny, you're in charge again because I can't see anyone.
Okay, is that Bill? Yes, Bill Smith moves.
Okay, and who
Yeah.
seconds?
I'll be happy
Barry.
to.
Oh, I got Barry.
Okay. All right. Is there any conversation, discussion, or questions on this amount or this category? Seeing none, we're ready to vote. Are there any no votes? Are there any abstentions? Hearing none, everybody raise their hand, say aye, and this is unanimous.
Aye.
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 Aye. Aye.
All right. Next one. Okay. So now we're on, that's the summary of all the items. You see that capital isn't there on this slide. But now we're going to the year-over-year Board of Selectmen operating budget. And the total is $51,223,270. I'm going to go through these slides before we have any discussions in that. But I guess it makes it easier. Can we have somebody move this motion to approve the town operating budget of $51,223,200?
Jack, it
Yeah.
says 51,123,270.
Yeah, 51,123. Did I say the wrong number?
You said 223. That's fine.
Oh, sorry.
That's fine.
Yeah, I need better glasses. 123, 270. Okay, yes, the proper amount. Jenny, can you have somebody move it and second it, please?
We got Louisa to move it. And we have Melinda second.
Fine, I'm going to quickly go through some slides. Here's the categories. I have to do some additions to this on what's core and what's growth. But here's the categories that we have so far. I have to add in fuel costs and insurance and healthcare and other benefits. But it's a new police officer. First one we're adding in years based upon the time that we anticipate to hire them. That is $62,000. Remember, Kate added $100,000 to the vacancies in the police department to account for the fact that it's been difficult to maintain the police department. We have a new fire inspector. That's core based upon the developments that we have going on. And we all knew that that was going to start on July 1st from last year's budget. There's a new emergency management, and I split it between core and growth. While it's a new FTE, and they will be spending all their time on the emergency management and working with the fire departments, they're also freeing up Mark McEwen, the assistant fire marshal, so that he can work as being a fire marshal and not have to jockey between the two jobs, where sometimes we need to do inspections and he has to deal with EMS, so or EM, emergency management. So that's why it's in both of those categories. There's a new sanitarian, which is a health inspector, because this is based upon when we intend to hire, and that's based upon the fact that with all the new developments, there's a lot of new places that need inspection. In fact, I think I mentioned once before that Darien may have as many as 50 food service places when you count the schools and the delis and the coffee places and the restaurants, um, and the other food, places that are selling food, like the meat shop, bakeries, or anything else along those lines, supermarkets, which is quite a lot. The other things that are adding to growth that's new in this year budget are the geese control for Highland Farms. Town is funding the fireworks for 18,000. In the past, we raised money for that. We're not doing that. There's an IT steering committee consultant for 25,000. Fuel costs and utilities are up, and so I'll just pop in that number. We increased the monies in grants and by 3,500 to kids in crisis. That's the first time in about a decade that we've made a contribution to them. There's some minor insurance increases. That's core. Health insurance and other benefits. That's core. All the salaries that I have given earlier already included the benefits associated with that individual job. And then Westman has a potential consultant for $10,000 if needed, and it's just is out there. So those are the various parts of the budget, and I'll fix up the percentages on the bottom. The next part, and I want to thank Louisa for helping me on this. This is the increases associated with the library. The library for the first time is up more than the Board of Selectmen. Usually it's one of the things that brings the total town budget down. Louise, I don't want to put you on the spot, but do you want to give a brief overview of the library?
Yes, the only problem I'm still in the train, so I don't have my paperwork here. So probably if you can
I
read
have it.
what I said. So sorry about that. It's just I'm in the train.
Well, more important that you're here than giving the explanation. Give me a second, I'll find the paperwork and go from there.
But again, the most important increases here are the health insurance, and even though the Connecticut state helped to reduce the amount and the percentage, is still one of the most important changes, health. And the other one was the maintenance on the building, basically utilities. Yes, it's just inflation, but those are the most important increases. They 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 receive the library receives a grant from Connecticut State because it's one of the libraries that have a lot of support for non-Darien residents, and it basically we are almost at the maximum of 50,000 revenue that the state sends. But again, just the most important it was increases were health and utilities for the maintenance. That's what we take care. The town grant takes care of the staffing and the maintenance of the building, while the Friends of the Darien Library takes care of the technology improvements, classes, getting more books, videos, and it's a private partnership that has worked for many years, and I think they do a pretty good job. And who doesn't love our library? But anyway, just what I recall on what I sent you.
Yes, that's a good job of it. We're going to move on. Are there any questions on the library? If not, we can move on to debt. Hearing none, we'll move on to debt. So
Okay.
this gives an outline of what principal payments and interest payments we intend to make over the next couple of years, as well as the outstanding debt that we have. I do have someplace details on the how much was bonded and how much was banned. I can send them around later. There is $84 million of authorized but not issued debt in the town. Most of it is, again, I'm going to that page. Here we go. Most, believe it or not, we still have about 7.5 million from Ox Ridge that hasn't been issued. And again, we have about 20 million, 18 million, 21 million associated with the HHR project. We did issue bonds of 7 million plus change for all of them. In addition, remember, none of them, we knew that there was going to be a grant, but because those grants are so finite and until they review the final plans, which we didn't have, it's virtually impossible to quantify the grants. So we anticipate that we're not going to use all of those funds for the building. We also have $2 million still outstanding on the Darien Fire Department Heavy Rescue. And that may not be coming in for another 2 years because it was pay upon receipt. And even though we did that during the current year, it was going to be a 24 to 36 month delivery. So while we had to approve it with the appropriation and bonding, it's not issued and it's not going to be issued for a while. And there's also 11.7 million still associated with Great Island. There is some premium that came in, and that will be used to pay the interest. And then on the premium on the bonds, I think we adjusted the premium was so high, we adjusted what we actually sold based upon the premium. So that pretty much covers most of the component parts of the Board of Selectmen operations. And now I'm going to take down the screen for a while because I did want to talk about something else. I'd like to make a motion that we reduce the Board of Finance contingency, which is $250,000, by $75,000. Historically, and I don't have the documents here, historically, it's only been 1 year which they've even come close to spending $200,000, and that was the first year of the pandemic. While they have spent it over the last 2 years, what they were basically doing is closeouts from the departments into that because it was just the easiest way to do it. When a line item in a department had spent more than what was authorized or what was there or needed, like we've had even this year. The hauling has been increased, but we've had greater tipping fees. Problem is that every one of those departments also returned money, so they could have done the switch easily within the department. And I believe that by bringing it down to 175, they have more than enough money. This year they started with 250, and they're anticipated to give back about 225. I don't think the 75,000 will affect them because there's one other thing that goes on. If they need more money, it's the same thing we told the Board of Ed. If they're getting close and something comes up, then we can always finance and put more money into that contingency for them to use those items. But historically, they've been returning a lot of money, and they've been always under, I said it with the one exception, under the 176. I apologize for not having that analysis. I've been working on the slides. Is there any comments from anyone on that?
Yes. So what budget is that? Is that Board of Ed or is that town?
Town. It's the town side.
Just on
And
a
it would-
procedure, hold it, just one, on a procedure, you wanted to make a motion? Are we making a motion to discuss this?
Yes,
So
we're
we-
making a motion to discuss. So I make a motion to reduce the Board of Finance contingency fund from 250,000 to 175,000 for this year. So I need a second on that. I have
Second.
Warner as a second. Okay, so now we can discuss. Any
Jack, do you have a history of, let's say, the past
I
5
do.
years?
I have to find it. So give me a second. I have to go to my my things. I apologize for not having this ready, but
That's okay. Yeah, just would like to be clear and for the record, what the history has been for the Board of Finance in terms of needing to spend contingency, which I'm assuming is for unforeseen expenses, right? Things that come up that need sort of immediate
Yeah.
funds.
let me see if I can find it elsewhere quickly. Um,
I recall that this came up before, and when Martha Banks was on our board and she had been on the Board of Finance, her experience was that the board, I think it was for the Rings End Bridge, was sort of an emergency expense, and the most they spent was about 200,000. But it's never been over that. Am I correct?
it was over there once with I have to go in here. It was over once with the when we had some funds that we had to do for the pandemic. But I gotta find where I put this analysis. Could have been.
I mean, my initial thought is 175,000 still, it seems still like plenty of money to be able to address something. 250, I think that's been,
No,
I don't know
it was
what the-
originally when we were talking about it before. The amount of funds was originally 400,000. We brought it down to 300,000, which is what Martha was talking about. That yes, they don't typically spend it, and then the then what happened is that Jamie moved it down to Jamie
Maybe
moved
change
it down
the number. He's raising his hands.
to 250.
So reducing it 75,000 is basically just under 1 mil, right?
Yeah,
The equivalent of 1 mil.
I'm less concerned about the reduction to the mill rate as I am to the fact that it's time to clean up some of these funds that we have that are just continuing to add money back into the year. We ended up this year with between the Board of Ed coming back with their money, mostly on the ECR, but also some vacancies. The town with also some very high vacancies, with someplace in the amount of over $4 million of money that were done on the budget. So Jen sent it to me earlier. So there's a lot of stuff going on that
James has his hands up.
Yeah. But I'm not ready to call on it. Here we go.
Well, I think since my recollection is it's never really, they've never really had to use over 200.
Well, I'm printing out an analysis that I have now, if you give me 1 second.
Sure.
Okay, so let me get back. I'm going to read you some of the numbers of how it's been used the last couple of years. In 2017, they had a 400,000 item, and they used 205,000 of it. They had 450. I'm sorry, and they returned 246,000. 2018, they had 400,000. They used 65,000 and returned 335,000. In 2019, they had 400,000. They used 117,000, returned 282,000. In 2020, they had 400,000 and returned 43,000, used only 43, returning 356,000. In the year of the pandemic, which is the only year that they really over this amount, they had 300,000 and they used 268,000. But again, we could always replenish any of those monies if they had need to, and it takes real quick. In 2022, it was reduced down to 250. That was reduced down by Jamie. They used only 77,000 of it. This year, it's also at 250, and they're planning on removing it down to returning someplace in the neighborhood between 200 and 225,000. We've been asking all the other boards to be cognizant of bringing their budgets in and trusting the RTM will give them if they get into a tight space. There's no reason in my mind that that amount of 250,000 is necessary. The bring it down to 175,000 covers virtually every year but the year of the pandemic over the last 7-8 years. And so I think it's a fair amount. It won't affect what they're doing for business. And should something come up, then we should be able to fill in the money like we just told the Board of Ed. If you need more money, we can give it to you. So are there any other comments before I go to Jim? No other comments from the committee? Okay, I'm going to Jim. Jim, you can speak now.
Hey guys, my kid's lacrosse game, so sorry for the background
No,
noise.
that's fine.
I just thought I would kind of point out a few things. In fact, I don't have the benefit of having a spreadsheet, so I assume maybe just you can send that to me later in the meeting or after the meeting. That'd be great to take a look at. But I just point out a couple things just so everyone knows. First off, I've been doing this for 16 years. The Board of Finance doesn't actually spend money, so although it's labeled as the Board of Finance Reserve, we don't have payroll, we don't have projects, we don't have funds. That reserve is there to support the town. So just to make sure everyone knows it's not an actual Board of Finance reserve for the Board of Finance's budget, because our budget's zero. Second thing I would point out, I think, Jack, this is a statement that you made earlier, and I think everyone should be aware of, is that this reserve isn't just for the quote town. This supports all the operating and can support capital activities throughout the town. So in the instance, like when you all heard our very public conversation with our partners on the Board of Ed about, they eliminated their budget control, as we've eliminated hundreds of thousands of dollars of kind of reserves throughout the budget. So that 250,000, which Jack is correct, for the better part of 10 years, it was at 400,000. We reduced it down to 250,000. That supports the Board of Ed as well. Should they have early in the season to add extra classes, or they need funds, they can come back to the Board of Finance, and we can immediately appropriate that for any for any operating expense. So just so that everyone knows, that supports our friends on the Board of Ed and the Board of Selectmen side. And it can also be used for capital. So what I would just say is, if you look at right now with the number of projects we have going on, 80-odd thousand for Great Island, 80-odd thousand for the overhaul of 3 different elementary schools, and just finishing up 60,000 here for new schools and other stuff. It also supports excesses that might pop up in all of those different capital funds. So I would just say, from my opinion, we looked at this very closely. We looked at what it had been historically. We've brought it down. I would say I think it's irresponsible to decrease it, because I think the town at $160 million budget, having 250,000 to basically provide a reserve to all of these various operating budgets around the town, I think it's relatively small, but I do think it's prudent. So that would be my opinion, and our board will keep it at 250.
I want to give you some responses. First of all, this is wait. Let me finish though. This is for operations. There's another 419,000, which after you did the dynamic signs, there's approximately 390 to 400,000 in the capital reserve fund, which is more likely of where you would use any of the new capital items that would be coming out. In addition, if there's significant overages in any of those projects, which, you mentioned the 3 schools in Great Island, then there's the responsibility of the town to come back to the RTM and the Board of Finance and the RTM to get approval for those extra funds to be spent. Lastly, the reduction was actually not done by the Board of Finance. The reduction was done in the RTM floor by the RTM for the 100,000 down to 300, and then it was done by Jamie. So while I appreciate and I do agree that this is not being used for, the Board of Finance, they're not running parties with this. This is for use of the town should emergencies or something that needs to be expedited, where the RTM you cannot wait 14 days, but there's very little things on that. I think the women's locker room was probably the best example, because we need to have it done by July 1st. And so that's an appropriate thing to take out of the a reserve for just doing the initial study. Also, over the years, I think it's only once that I've seen that the Board of Ed has used these funds. And you don't need to do it to start the year for the Board of Ed, because quite honestly, the Board of Ed ran a long deficit on the pandemic, and in February we cleaned it up. So if they need some teachers, there's more than enough budget transfers that they can do, that they can run a deficit, see what the changes are, and then come in February and come back to us, which we've already committed to them. So I'll go from there. Peter, Jack? And then I will get you, John. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I'd like just to amplify those comments, which is, and maybe this is an issue of perception here, but the perception from the RTM's point of view is that we understand that again, as Jack said, these are not funds that are being used by the Board of Finance for any particular operational authority of its own, but it does allow other town boards to spend money without having RTM direct oversight. And from the RTM's point of view, we think that needs to be done only in extraordinary situations. And the best, we had this issued this year with the SSOs, which we added 6 full-time FTEs, which is a major appropriation without any RTM substantive input into that. And what we want to make sure there is adequate flexibility for things that do come up which need immediate attention. We believe that in good faith, the RTM will consider all other types of expenditures that should be coming before us in due process.
Right. But to me, I do want to add, the SSOs are a different thing than this. This is that we're returning money to the town every year and that we're not using. And so rather than taxing our taxpayers for this extra amount, it's better that we hold off taxing. And if you need it, come back. But John, you have your hand raised, so I want to give you an opportunity.
Yeah, Jack, thank you. When we were going through budget control, one of the understandings was that there was a Board of Finance contingency, a significant one that could back us up if we needed to use the funds to increase section size. Remember, we've cut, before this year, we had already cut budget control in half.
Right.
So I'm a little, this is coming up late in the process. I might have, I can't speak for the board, of course. I'm just one member and just the finance committee head. But I personally would have thought differently, knowing that this contingency would have been cut and might cause me pause by not adding it in the future on budget control. I want some ample flexibility. I get your sense and your point that we want to limit reserve funds. However, we also want expedient appropriations of these funds. And I would say, again, this is much different than the SSO. We used our own,
Yes.
Budget surplus to make the decision to add FTEs along the SSOs as well as the mental health director. It would have played out much differently, of course, if we didn't have that surplus. So I would be, again, I'm a little troubled that this was added so late. I don't even know if it was on the agenda, so I couldn't prep, to have any more detailed comments. But no, I wasn't prepared, so I'm just telling you these are my initial thoughts, but I'll be reporting back to Duke and the rest of the board that this occurred.
Duke was already aware of this. I told him today.
None of the other board members were, though, so thank you, Jack.
That's fair. But John, before you go, with leaving 100, and I'm very cognizant, with leaving $175,000 there, that more than covers 2 teachers, which you would have should there be a section break, which I do understand that there has to be at least coverage there, but that's 2 teachers there. And should there be an addition for replenishing that full amount that was used to cover the teachers, that can be done at in either an emergency meeting or the next meeting of the RTM, and funds are readily there.
What step are you, Jack? What step are you assuming for 2 teachers at $175,000?
I was assuming about $80,000.
That's a pretty low step. I'm just pointing that out.
I can't talk on steps, but it used to be. How much was in budget control? I only thought there was about $250.
Well, there was 2, I think it was 260 or 2. Again, I wasn't prepared. Yeah. So sorry, but let's just call it 250 approximately. But again, remember, we whittled that down in half over the last 2 budget cycles. And as you said, it took a while, and that's because there was some concern that we wouldn't have ample flexibility. So, again, this was just another layer to be nimble. And again, I would have thought a little differently about eliminating entirely budget control. This is, again, my personal comments. I can't speak for the board.
Well, but John, I will contradict with you that number one, we're not taking 100,000, which would have brought it down to 150. I do believe at 175, there's ample funds in there to cover any section break. And again, we can easily move it. But again, the Board of Ed can run a deficit even on adding teachers on a section break. You did it during the whole pandemic, which they're not what we want to do on teachers, but there is funds there that the Board of Finance should be able to move over even in April on their August meeting because the funds are there, or July.
I'm very aware of that, but I also don't like using the pandemic, situation as something we can fall back on. That was extraordinary, and hope we never foresee that in the rest of our lives.
I would agree on both of those.
And then just from a constituent side, I'll just add, that, as Jim pointed out, it's not just for Board of Ed, it's for the entire town. So as a constituent, I'm also a little concerned. I mean, I know that's also been cut. So we're whittling reserves down to almost nothing, and that causes me concern. So thanks.
Appreciate it, Tom.
And Jack, if I could just,
your opinion.
when you get a second, Jack.
Go ahead, Jim, and then I'm going to Jenny.
Yeah, I just had one big question, and I guess, Jack, I guess you raised this, but, the contingency, which again, doesn't support the Board of Finance, supports the whole town, capital, operating, everything. That was in the Board of Selectmen's budget when that came out in January, and I didn't recall there being any comments from you or anyone really about that. And then we debated it for a month and had 5 meetings over a period of 3 weeks. And I'll check back through my notes, but I don't think a single person attended our meeting or sent in any comments around asking our board to think about maybe moving it from 250 to 200 to 200 to 175. And so I guess a little bit just from a process standpoint, I'd just like to let everybody know, when the Board of Selectmen is voting on their budget, if you have comments, I think it's incumbent on us to deliver those comments and let people know. And even on the Board of Finance side, I mean, we received no comments on the budget that we voted on. And we're always happy to engage as a board of 7 in a very thoughtful manner when people bring forward ideas or have questions or want to talk about overall reserves in the town. It's just, I would just leave everybody with, at least moving towards next year, if you have thoughts and things that you want to change in a budget, you should bring them up ahead of time, most importantly for the 2 operating boards in this town, the Board of Selectmen and Board of Ed, to consider. And then please, I beg people, if you have comments, which again, we received 0 on our budget, right? Please bring them to the Board of Finance while we're debating them and before we're voting, so we can pull these all together in a thoughtful way so we can present the RTM with the best overall budget, which reflects the input of all of our citizens and residents, including members of the RTM. So from a process standpoint, let's think about what the best way to do this is. Thanks.
You're welcome. And I have no problems modifying that to bring it down by 50 to bring it to 200. But I do believe that the amount of funds that we've been returning has started to become excessive. And I think that we've been closing down other pockets of funds in this town, and if they're being used, fine. But if they're not, then I don't see a reason for us to be using this. I do believe it was raised by David Martin during the Board of Finance discussions. I have to admit, since I was unable for health reasons to go to your meetings, I did try and watch most of these on video. I can't say that my memory is as good for watching something on video as being in the room. So I do understand your comment, but this is not something that I haven't raised before.
Yeah, no, so Jack, you can always send an email. I guess just so everyone's aware on the surpluses, right? When you really dissect the surpluses that have been returned to the town, and I think it's important to understand how these surpluses arrive at, because they're really the result of different departments and different operating boards and how they budget. I think when you really dissect like last year's, we were unable and we were delayed in terms of hiring 4 to 5 extra police officers. And so there were extra funds returned to the town, not because the department heads did not do a great job forecasting their budgets, but just because they were unable to hire. And likewise, I think, this year, when you look at the Board of Ed side, it's not that they designed a poor budget and they're going to give back, close to $1 million of extra funds. It's because in certain cases, the student population was lower than what they expected. And in other cases, they were unable to hire teachers or add certain staff until partway through the year, or still, it's a little bit of a challenge to kind of bring additional staff that they need on. So, these surpluses are not just extra money that's always just like baked in. There are sort of operational things that come up that cause the surpluses to come back. And I think both boards have generally used those, except in rare circumstances on the Board of Ed when they had to hire, they felt it was incumbent on them to hire the SSOs. They return all those funds and we roll them directly back into the next year's budget. So I think not all surpluses are created equal. I think it's important to really, again, dissect what how they've been generated and whether it's because of a fail.
Jim, we discussed that last week, and it will be discussed at the RTM meeting. Predominantly, most of the expense surpluses are attributable to vacancies throughout the department. There was also, quite honestly, jokingly, it didn't snow this year, which sort of offset some other public works because we had some more, somebody was out, so we had more cartage coming in, and while the fees went up, we also had more revenue. On the Board of Ed side, a lot of it has to do with ECR. That was significantly higher than what was budgeted, and that's based upon the number of students that are there. On the revenue side, it's yes, we had more tipping fees for about 250,000, which was partially offset by about 159,000 on carding costs. But we basically had about $1.1 million in investment income based upon higher rates and other things like that. And also for this year's budget, that's moved up to 1.7 plus change. So, those all things help the budget. But the fact of the matter is, that's a lot of money coming back. And while the general fund has to increase to reach the required amount of what the Board of Finance is comfortable with, but as our budget grows, that amount that needs to be in the general fund also grows. And we've already given 2.6 million back to pay down capital. So, but if there's something that we can hold off on and go from there, that's fine. And if 50,000 is the right amount to move it down, and that's what the committee feels like, it doesn't mean that it gets through the RTM. We're just going to, if it votes and passes, then goes to the RTM and they get their say on it. So,
hey, Jack, I just got to correct you on one thing. The ECR surplus was not because of students, for the most part. It was because of enhanced revenues that were passed by the state. That's where.
Yes, you're right.
That's okay. So let's again.
I appreciate that.
And just for clarity's sake, that you've been through the ECR process year after year. That is a massively moving target, and Rich did a brilliant memo kind of showing how he comes to his estimates. But when the state gives you more money out of the blue, you start to run a surplus relative to what you expected earlier in the year when you set that budget.
Plus, Jack, just to build on what John just said, after the Board of Ed passed their budget, Rich came back with an adjustment to what was going on this year, which he did a brilliant job, but I agree. And also added to what the ECR will be for next year based upon some revised information. So, you've heard me say most of the time that how much I enjoy Rich's budget because you can write-ups because you understand everything that's going on there. So I agree with that.
Jack, this is Bert. Can I say something? It sounded earlier already that we are nitpicking because we bring up things so late in the process, and now we're nitpicking because we're negotiating between 50,000 and 100,000. I didn't have time to look at any of this because I didn't know this was an issue. And if it had been an issue, why wasn't it brought up earlier? Now where we are right now, after weeks and months of looking into the budget to make these changes and just in one category, seems to me gives off we didn't do our homework before, we're doing it now. And finally, I also think there should be some flexibility in the Board of Finance and the Board of Education and the Board of Selectmen, and budget control is a very important part of that. I'm okay with it. I don't think we need to change what has already been published. That's my opinion.
Jack, I have a question on the 4 million in surplus that is coming back to the town. Can you explain, for the record, when there's a surplus in different departments, can those be transferred between departments throughout the year? Like, is that if one department is experiencing a surplus?
Yes.
What flexibility? So if there's $4 million, and I get a lot of that is driven by interest income on the treasury.
No, yeah,
management.
but a lot of it was driven by vacancies also, but go ahead.
Right. So, but there's $4 million that is coming back to the town, which is, I think, certainly the largest I've seen in my short tenure on this board. So, we're focusing in on, $75,000. But there's 4 million available, right? So can you just explain what happens when there's a surplus in, let's say, a Board of Ed department? Does the Board of Ed
Okay, so let's back up a little bit, because it's different for both. The Board of Ed is given a total appropriation. So if they end up with more money, let's say in revenue, then they can actually spend things or move things between departments. I think there's about 8 categories. And if it's within a category, it doesn't need to go to the Board of Ed Finance Committee and be approved by the board. But since we're giving them a total appropriation, they can move monies around in that based upon what they see necessary between their finance director and the board. Obviously, if they're getting more funds in ECR, which they're not going to spend typically, but if they get the ECR or they make more revenue because the gates at football games are greater this year, or because of parking or something else like that, then that they have the opportunity to spend that money should they desire, or they can return it to the town. Again, their option. All right. We have nothing to say with what goes on within that budget, again, because it's a total appropriation. Board of Selectmen is different. Just because they get more revenue doesn't allow them to increase their appropriations on the expense side. 2 different areas. Everything that they spend has to be appropriated. That's why we have line item veto, as does the Board of Finance. The Board of Finance and us both have line item veto on the Board of Selectmen budget. That means we can change a line item, as opposed to, we can say we wanted to cut 200,000. I'm not proposing that. But if we wanted to cut 200,000 from the Board of Ed, we can't tell them where to cut or how to cut. That's their prerogative, their purview, and we don't have any say in that. The same way, we can't add $200,000 to their budget and say, we want you to use that 200,000 to buy better pencils, because they don't have to spend it. How they spend those line items, the best way I sort of put it is, those line items are placeholders. They're not responsible to us to come back and explain. Within their own organization, within their own board, there are limits of, if it's going between categories, it has to be provided. If it's within categories, it's provided, but the Board of Ed doesn't vote on it. So Rich would be able to do it. I would assume that John's committee on the finance is seeing any of those that are within the same category before they're made. So
I'll just clarify, it's based on a dollar amount.
Yeah,
and
also.
it has to be, and those transfers have to be, we cover them in finance, recommend to the board, and if it's over a certain dollar amount, again, I don't have that number handy, but it's not a significant amount. The board has to vote on the transfer from RC to RC and account to account.
Right. But quite honestly, they're extremely well documented, and whatever covered. I mean, you just look at the agenda and the what's going on in the finance committee, and you see everything that you need to see there. It's a great packet that's provided, and as I said, I read that on a monthly basis, and honestly know what just went on in the Board of Ed for the last month and what they expect to have. It's just and then it's discussed further in John's committee. Is that
Just for clarity, also, the ECR excess funds were not used for anything along the lines of the mental health director, SSO. Remember, we also, at the recommendation, I think of you, even Jack, we did some pre-purchasing and reduced next year's budget on some minor, I think it was about 260,000. So we used that surplus on small capital items, if you will, or hard items that wouldn't really change the syntax of how we budget those items. So again, very thoughtful. We run through it every month. There's a very detailed packet, account by account, but we do have to approve it. And even if Alan has a very small transfer, he has to disclose it.
Right. And quite honestly, not only is there a great write-up, you know, the budget book that you see for the Board of Ed with every line item and every RC center is totally filled out, which is, to me, has my mouth dropped sometimes, better known as gobsmacked. But yes,
just
I was
to add
very
one last point. Sorry, Jack.
Yeah.
Just to add one last point. Again, this surplus this year was extraordinary, and a lot of that was the fallout for COVID and the fact that we could not hire teachers. There were none available to hire, so we had to. They were using stipends and coverage to cover, you know, the areas that we could not find a body or an employee, an FTE. I do not expect that to occur next year. Part of which is because we approved a much improved contract as well. So, you know, there are some kind of ripple effects from COVID, and that was one of them in the vacancies. So I think, especially with the adjustments that we made to this year's upcoming budget, the fiscal year 24, you're not going to see that kind of leeway. And the fact that we can hire people now at a greater clip, we're going to miss a lot of those surpluses that we enjoyed this year. And again, it wasn't just because we over budgeted, it was because we couldn't fill the FTE spots. So I'll just leave it there.
I'm going to be honest. I've never seen the Board of Ed coming back with this amount of money. I was also very happy that when they were trying to figure out what monies were available and having a discussion with Rich Rudel, that anything that was associated with special ed was moved off the line and moved off the table just in case something happened. And it was only what the other options were available. But anyway, is there further discussion on reducing the Board of Finance contingency account by $75,000? If not, we're ready to vote. So if people can turn on their things and raise their hands, because I actually can see what's going on. All in favor of the reduction of, I'll do it the other way. Anybody who is not in favor of reducing by 75,000, please raise your hand. I have Bill Smith, I have Bert, I have Bill Dunn, and Barry, and Charles. All in favor, I have myself, Malin, Beth, Louisa, Werner, and Jenny. What does that add up to? Jenny, can you give me the vote?
I think I counted 7. Bill, Bert, Bill Dunn, Barry, and Charles are against, so that leaves 7 in favor.
Okay, and that was how many against? I'm sorry.
5 against.
1, 2, 3. Okay, 4, 5. Okay, so it passes. So I will raise it on the floor of the RTM. If it doesn't pass, I'm not too concerned. I want this to be a topic that's being discussed next year's budget. And, you know, David Martin raised this, and I don't feel got a proper hearing on it at the Board of Finance. That's my own personal opinion.
Well,
So,
hey, Jack, if I could leave just the committee with one thing as you're kind of working through the rest of the budget, is that, you know, you have to look at the totality of the budget, whether it's $200,000 or $250,000 Board of Finance contingency. You have to look at what was done with everything else. We pushed up building permits to what we thought was a very aggressive level. We added a couple $100,000 to investment income, which was above what the treasurer was recommending and so forth. If you go throughout some other areas of the budget where we pushed a little bit on revenue, looking at one small reserve, you really need to look at all the other revenue and how all the other pockets of the budget were budgeted. And so one of the reasons we stuck to 250, if you recall, I mean, you listened to our meeting and everything, was because we pushed up all these other revenue line items. And the more you push up a revenue line item, that's the same as bringing down an expense line item, and it tightens the budget up. So that was my point about, kind of doing this like last minute, not like engaging our board or board of selectmen on it, and kind of thinking about it in the totality of the entire budget that you guys are going to be guiding the RTM to vote on. It's looking at one small corner and ignoring everything else that's in the room from a revenue and surplus perspective. So just think about that as you think about the overall budget.
First of all, Jim, many of us have been looking at these budgets for a number of years, and we understand how to look at the detail and have a pretty good understanding of the detail and how to review budgets in its totality. So I appreciate what you want to leave with. I want you to leave with that we know what we're doing in our jobs. That's number one. Number two, the contingency has nothing to do with putting in extra revenue, because we cannot use the contingency to cover revenue. The only thing we can use to cover shortfalls in revenue is the general fund at the end of the year, should we be over. It's not the Board of Finance contingency. That's not a correct statement. The Board of Finance contingency is for town and Board of Ed expenses that either need to be expedited, such as we need to get something done because we need to deliver it in July. Otherwise, there's absolutely nothing that if we need to go into the general fund for, that we can't do it of any large or sizable amount. So that's what I want to leave with, that I don't want information being misrepresented on what that fund is supposed to be used for and what it can be used for. But anyhow, let's move back onto the budget. So that was the only other change that I had. And so let's close things out. And we now have a motion that would say that we're approving the Board of Finance approved budget for $51,073,270 as adjusted. All those in favor of approving that budget, please raise your hand. Peter, Bert, Werner, Milan. Is there anybody voting against the budget?
Okay, yeah, because it's the adjustment.
Okay, so if you want to vote against, vote against. So it carries with one negative. And I'll explain the no vote, Bert. No problems about it. All right. And I appreciate your opinion. And you know that. So let me go back to the next thing we have to approve. Let me get my glasses so I read this properly. So the next line item that we will do, we already did the Board of Ed, is D, the total appropriation, which again is now $165,522,094. Again, we vote. Bert, if you want to vote against, that's fine. I'll ask for the no votes on that. This has been adjusted for the 50,000.
It's
So
really difficult, Jack, because if there's one item in there that I have problems with, if otherwise the budget is fine, I just, I don't.
I understand. I understand, and that's what I'm going to explain. I fully understand what your position is.
Okay,
So
I'm fine with the budget. I just have trouble with that one item that we discussed for the last half an hour.
fully understand. And I will make sure that that's explained. But all in favor of the number that I just mentioned, please raise your hand. Sorry, did everybody go off? Oh, I need, sorry, my fault.
Aye.
I need a motion first on that, the motion that I just said for approving a general fund, total general fund appropriation of $165,522,094. Do I have somebody moving that?
I move.
Is that Werner?
Yes.
And seconding it, I need a second. I have Louisa. Okay, so we have one no vote with Bert. Can everybody turn on their screen so we can take a vote on in favor of that motion, and we'll move forward. Just raise your hand if you're in favor of the combined total.
I am in favor.
Okay, thank you.
Let me make one comment, if I may. I'm kind of in Bert's camp on this also. I'm definitely in favor of everything here with the one caveat. So I just want to be on the record with that.
Exactly.
I've been in both of your positions and have taken that also, and I promise you that in the delivery of the report from where we stand, I will do it, but we may not need to change it depending upon if it doesn't pass the RTM, then we go right back to the other numbers. So
Very good.
let me,
Thank you.
and again, I'm more interested in raising this because it's something that I've raised on a number of occasions. Okay, let's go to moving the mill rate calculation of on 2414E, and that is to vote on a mill rate. I'm not making an adjustment to this on the mill rate because it's not a fill mill, and I don't think it really will matter. So I need a motion to have the mill rate, and I take great pleasure once I can find the page, which is around here someplace in this office. Here we go. This would be to establish the mill rate at 17.62. We're going to go into that. That when the full resolution you read has the payable dates on it, but I'm not going to go through it in total. So can I have somebody move that motion? I have Jenny. We need a second.
I'll be happy to second, Jack.
Okay, thank you.
On the mill rate, I'm happy to second.
And right, I'm not changing the mill rate, quite honestly.
Yeah.
So this isn't about changing the mill rate. All right. So I'm going to start with the first part is to go through the analysis of the mill rate because there's some new things this year. So we start with our grand list, which is up 1.55%. And that's the full grand list. We then have to remove from the grand list Great Island, which is 41 million plus change. there were subsequent increases and decreases to the grand list based upon when it was first calculated and delivered at the end of January. I think it's done in October, rather. So since that time, based upon the demolition of the Palmer's property and the next phase of the Federated property, there's an addition to the grand list at this time of $6.9 million. Then there's state, local tax relief and abatements, and it went up rather substantially this year. A good part of that is due to the fact that we increased the volunteer rate. So that was part of it. And then the other part was that we just simply had, we had more on the state, local, elderly tax relief than we had. So that comes down to an adjusted, a grand list left relief and corrections of $8,852,979,000 and change. We then look at the 5-year collection rate, which is calculated, and reduce the 5-year collection rate by 25 basis points. That was discussed at the Board of Finance meeting. I agree with the outcome of the Board of Finance. You know, year after year, sometimes based upon challenges to properties or other things like that, or the mere fact that we might collect less or other things, we have the collection rate is down. So if you want to look at the total collection rate here, we're at about 99.7% as a collection rate, which is really phenomenal. But we do multiply that times the grand list to determine what the adjusted grand list for mill rate calculation will be, because we're anticipating that we may not collect everything that we're getting. So now we're going to start again and bring back and tie some things together, why I think some things will change in the order of how we do things next year. So if we go over here and we get to the total town appropriation and the total Board of Ed appropriation, we end up with 165,572, which is what we approved in 2314D. We take away the non-tax revenues, which grew significantly this year, partly because we had $75,000 recorded for investment income in the prior year, although there was a request to amend that. And the town financial director and the treasurer came in with a new adjusted rate, going from about 1.5 to 1.65, but that was increased to 1.7 plus change. So there's about half of that non-tax revenue increase is simply the increase in the investment income we're anticipating. From there, we deduct that, we come up with the total taxes need to be raised for the general fund, which is the $1,153,401,165. And then after we've had that appropriation that we did in 23-14A, where we approved about 4.7 in appropriations for capital, less the 2.64 that we are using from the general fund to pay down capital, resulting in only needing to raise approximately 1.8 million for capital. So that's the total funds. But since we're doing this separately, the mill rate for operations that are going into the general fund is 17.42%. The increment on the capital is 20 basis points, which comes up to our total 17.62, which is the new mill rate. It's an increase of 2.32%. And so I do want to show one other thing on there before we get to the last two items. One of the things that I did last year, and I'm doing it again because we have so many adjustments coming in, is we adjust for, if you look at the total initial request of the capital, the town budget, and the Board of Ed budget. Although we're using the Board of Ed budget, but I do initial capital on that because the town budget and Board of Ed budgets have already been adjusted by the board, so we can use that. The total budget request came out to 170 million plus change. If we were using the prior year's grand list, adjusted grand list, that would be a mill rate of over 19.5. So there's some reductions on how we get down to the 17.62, which I think are important to recognize. The Norotan Heights retaining wall, which was in the budget for 110 million, was removed from the budget. That will, not sure what the dollar amount will be, but there is a chance that might, we may use some ARPA funds depending upon what happens in the ARPA committee to pay for that retaining wall. If not, it will either come back to the RTM or depending upon the price, if there are funds in the capital reserve, it might be paid for there. But it's definitely coming back off cycle. How it's paid for will be determined after we get the estimate on what's there. There was a transfer from the unassigned fund balance in 2313 for 2.64 million. That reduced the mill rate by 30 basis points. There's also basic revenues. We did move some of the revenue out and put it into town revenue, which is also one of the reasons why it increased, because it's more in compliance with what the state wants on that. Although we still keep our paving for our roads in the capital side. There was an increase in other non-tax revenues of 3.5, which reduced it by another 38 basis points. Now we're coming to the real things that are happening. Number one, there's a significant reduction in both the fact that we have a higher mill rate this year, as well as the fact that the growth in the grand list of 1.55%, a little bit less after the adjustments, is generating approximately $8.9 million of revenue based upon the higher increase in the mill rate, plus the fact that using last year's rate, what we had in the growth of 94 million plus adjusted, generating a lot of money. And so that gets us to the 17.62. And I think it's always important that we're going through this because, the expenses were high. And I'm very impressed with how both boards were able to reduce their expenses. But, one thing that Kate always says to me, Kate Bush, is, there are costs that are going to be, we're going to incur because of these developments. As I said, we have a sanitarium, we have another fire inspector going on, and the assistant fire marshal can do more inspections as well. That's all based upon the growth, and we're not in full development yet. The schools, while they've calculated in what the anticipated number of students will be in their school system and planned accordingly for the growth and the HHR and other things like that, there's a lot of demographics on that part of the town that they go through. It's a rather long presentation, but if anybody wants it, I can find the board meeting and send it to you. None of those students really, the bulk of those students aren't in the school systems yet. So the reason why I'm saying it is, just because we're making the extra money, we shouldn't be necessarily spending it, because there's other expenses that are going to be coming down the road in the future. And so when we're doing incremental additions that have long-term costs going forward, we should be cognizant of that. And I know the Board of Ed is, and I know the Board of Selectmen is, but I do mention that. So with that, I'm going to put this down. And are we ready to vote on the mill rate? We did have it moved and seconded, right, Jenny? Okay. So all in favor of the mill
Yes.
rate at 17.62, raise your hand. Okay, are there any noes? Not seeing or hearing any noes, it passes unanimously. Next item.
Hey, Jack, it's Charles. If I could just make an observation.
Sure.
When I first joined the RTM, I spent some time surfing around the website on Hartford, and there are competitive statistics available for mill rates for similar towns such as ours, and what's also happening over time. And just as a factoid, which I don't want to discuss it tonight, but we should discuss it one of these days, is, for example, in 2014, the mill rate in Darien was 13.17 versus now what we just approved is 17. So we are experiencing a consistent creep of the mill rate every year. And we may not see much of a difference year by year, but if you take like a 10-year view or a 9-year view, it's moved quite a bit. So I do think that'd be worth I'm more interested in that conversation than how we're handling the issue of the Norotan Heights Fire Department retaining wall, its impact on the mill rate. I'd like a conversation about, are we happy with what our mill rate's doing over a 10-year period?
I do want to give a quick little response to that, because it is part of the reason why we went from the lower mill rate up to where we are now, 16, 17 mills. What happened is our grand list and the reval 2 revals ago dropped significantly. So the expenses stayed the same, but the grand list, which is the denominator, was reduced, which pushed up the what the mill rate was. So one of the things that we've tried to do here, and it's part of what we're doing, is that we started to break down and look at what we do control. And the 3 boards control 3 of our items, and then the library provides a grant on it else. But what they increase in their expenses is something we can control. We can't control the market. And I'm anticipating that the mill rate will drop after the next reval, because I think the market has risen, if that's going to follow. So yes, it's a worthwhile conversation, but we have to be aware of when the grand list goes up or down and how that affects it, versus I like to track what the expenses are that the various boards are paying and what their growth rate is, because that will have something that we can control and has a greater impact. That's the only part of this equation we control. So, Bert.
I think, Charles, one other way to kind of look at this one is how it compares to other towns in Fairfield County. And my understanding is that Darien still has the second lowest mill rate of any town in Fairfield County. The only one being lower is Greenwich, and obviously Greenwich has much more tax income from businesses than what we have. And looking forward with all the developments that we have, I would assume that our income from taxes from businesses going forward will increase.
I didn't want to open a can of worms. I merely wanted to point it's a conversation I think we should have at some point, and I didn't mean to have it tonight. I merely wanted to point it out as something I think we should chat about.
I agree with Charles.
totally
It's
agree.
really important to have that conversation, but you have to plot the curve, which acts funny because you only have a reval every 5 years. And inflation enters the picture on the grand list differently than it does on the expenses. But you want to track those things by removing the hump that occurs, the bump that is occurring. You want to have a longer view. 10 years is very important. And I don't think it's enough to say that we have a lower mill rate than everyone else. We want to know, how has the mill rate developed for us? Are we good stewards? Do we continue to watch our purse and all these things? And going back to the budget that we have this year, it's very clear to me. It shows on the expense side, on the income side, clearly the effects of inflation. It's everywhere, and I think it's a good budget because it handles it sensitively. Nobody expected the budget to be smaller this year than last year, obviously, and given the inflation rate that we have, I think it's a good budget. And if I voted on some aspect against that earlier, it's just to be taken with a grain of salt. Overall, this is a great budget.
Yeah, that again, we'll move on, but I think it's a good
we said our house values right now, the mill rate will probably go down by 1 to 3 points because the housing market the value of the houses have increased significantly versus the last time the grant list was done.
And just this is the one comment that I always make. Depending upon, I divide the homes into 3 sections, and depending upon what section, what the value of your house is and how that section has moved up or down, there have been cases where the upper section, based upon the grand list change 2 revals ago, that some of the higher valued homes actually had cuts in their tax revenue. Yep, they went down significantly, while people in the under $1 million homes had 20% increases because it was just a redistribution of what went on. But that again, the lower homes valued under $1 million, we'll see some growth again this year. But hopefully the value of the upper echelon homes also went up, so it gets redistributed. So that's the other thing. It's not just what the mill rate is, it's how it affects your house. And there's only one other comment that I want to make, only because Werner mentioned it. I did an analysis for the town maybe 8 years ago, 10 years ago at this time. And Greenwich's grand list is greater than 10% of the total grand list of the state of Connecticut, which is why they're about 10 basis points. They're at 10, but it's basically that if you look at their grand list, it's like, oh my goodness. So anyhow, let's go back to, we voted on the mill rate. This is the last slide that I have, which is 23-14G, which is the other appropriations for these funds. The other parties, the first three will be discussed by Public Works. The Park and Rec will discuss the last one. I did put down a note here. There is a Great Island Management Fund that was approved by the RTM June 22nd on 2022. The fund is a self-contained fund and does not require, because there's virtually no activity in it this year, does not need to have an increase in the appropriation because the fund was already appropriated for that. The difference between the Great Island Management Fund and the Recreation Program Fund is that none of the expenses, other than interest, but none of the expenses associated with Great Island at this point is being paid out of the general fund. In other words, salaries or other things like that. Again, self-contained. Where the costs and expenses associated with the Recreation Program Fund is in fact paid by the general fund. And so that's the only fund that the net between the expenses and revenue are closed out into the general fund at the end of the year. So do we have a motion to approve the appropriations to the general funds that I just listed? Somebody want to move it? I have Lisa moving. I have Jenny going and seconding it. All in favor? Let's raise our hands and move on. That looks like if there's anybody against, please open up and say no. So count the people that you can see, Jenny, and that's
11.
Okay, that's ours.
We lost Barry dropped off.
Well, Barry was visiting his grandchildren in California. I want him, without question, he should be able to hang out with his grandchildren. So let's see what else we have. We have to approve the $5 million for authorized borrowing up to $5 million for cash flow. Do I have a movement on that? Who wants to move that? Somebody raise your hand so we can get done. Jenny and Bill, all in favor, raise your hand. I was assuming no discussion. It's unanimous. Lastly, we have minutes from 4/26/22. Can somebody move that? Bill.
With the amendment?
I don't consider it to be amended, but okay. What was handed to the committee, they didn't see the original copy. So only you and I did. So all in favor, raise your hand. That's fine. I want to thank everybody for all the budget work that they did this year. With that, I'll take a motion to adjourn.
Hey, Jack, before you adjourn, can I just ask? I have my hand up, just a quick kind of public.
I didn't see it. I'm sorry.
That's okay. So just so I can report back, I'm just kind of typing out an email to my board to keep them updated. We reduced the Board of Selectmen budget by the $75,000, and we did that through the line item of the Board of Finance Reserve, right?
Yeah.
And we did that. I think my notes here say generally because we don't want to tax the taxpayer for money that we may not need.
That's correct.
Okay, but then nothing else changed as it relates to the Board of Ed or the overall fund transfers or the mill rate, right?
Absolutely nothing changed.
Okay. Okay, I think I understand it, but I just to, unless I'm missing something. Yeah, so, but you understand that if you reduce the Board of Selectmen budget by $75,000 via the reserve and you don't change the mill rate, everybody's taxes stay the same, right?
Well, it'll stay the same from what our committee did, but it depends upon what the RTM does. So if the RTM votes in favor of it, it may change and lower the mill rate by 1 basis point. If it doesn't pass the RTM, then there was no change to the mill rate.
So if it does pass, there'll be a motion to amend the mill rate, right?
Yep.
Wait, so you guys, so you passed a reduction, but you didn't change the mill rate to reflect it?
That's correct. I'm not sure it's going to pass. We're raising it. That's what we're doing.
But I guess just to report back, I want to make sure, like, you changed one piece of the budget, but not all the other pieces that feeds into.
We did change.
If it passes, then we'll, from the floor of the RTM, we'd have to make a motion to amend the mill rate to reflect the reduction.
But I guess I just want to make sure all those that voted for the budget.
We understand what we did.
Oh, okay.
All right. And I'll send out a summary to Monica, Kate, and Jen as well. And
that would be great.
Okay. You're welcome, Jim. I understand your concern, but it's also, it may or may not affect the mill rate depending upon where we were. So anyway, can we now take a motion to adjourn? I have Bill and I have Charles. All in favor, raise your hand. Thank you all for a very good budget season. And we'll see you on Monday night. Thanks a lot. Bye.